people with disabilities in recreation is not just about building bathrooms that you can roll into and other facilities. It's about serving people and the needs that people have, and the needs of all of us to enjoy outdoor settings and a variety of outdoor settings. What I see today here are a bunch of tasks, a bunch of temporarily able-bodied people, because it's most likely that sometime in each one of our lives, we will have to deal with some kind of a disability, and often it will be a mobility impairment. I've already had that happen to me. I ended up with casts on both legs and crutches for a while. And I'll tell you, the world is a lot different place when you're facing it with that kind of an impairment. Accessibility then means choice. And what we try to do when we're working in programs is to give all Americans equal opportunity to make their own choices about outdoor recreation experiences. We don't want the choices made for them by facilities or services that have barriers or that have other things about the program that they just can't deal with, and therefore the choice is already made. This morning on the program, we have two excellent speakers to talk to us about access for the physically challenged. The first is Roger West, who's the Managing Director of Wilderness on Wheels Foundation since 1986. And I've read some of the material that Roger sent me, and Wilderness on Wheels is absolutely fascinating. And it was founded on the personal convictions that Roger had to face when his father was disabled and had to use a wheelchair, and yet he was an avid outdoorsman. It really changed his life. I'll let Roger tell you more about that particular foundation, about the work that he's doing to open up the outdoors for all Americans. I also see on his bio that he's been a radio broadcaster for quite a number of years as well, and I believe that because he has a wonderful speaking voice, so you'll enjoy listening to him this morning. Roger West.
Oh, good morning again. Well, I got my exploding microphone on. About 7 years ago, I didn't know what watchable wildlife was. Now I are one. I'm working on my sense of humor. I don't need this one, do I? It was in 1985. I was living up in the mountains of Colorado, southwest of Denver, about 60 miles, near a peak called the North Cone of Twin Peaks, which looks out over a place in Colorado Central that reminds me of what it might feel like to be standing on the moon. It's a giant circular crater-like flat area ringed by the Continental Divide on one side and what they call foothills, 12,300 foot high on the other. It's gorgeous. That's why I ended up there in 1974 after being in business in Florida. And deciding I didn't want to do that anymore, I struck out on the road to be in the wilderness. I wanted to be alone. I wanted to tune into something that wasn't exterior, that wasn't man-made. And I found this piece of land up there after about 6 weeks on the road in a van, and purchased it. Set out to listen to that inner voice for a while. About a year, I suppose. No clock, no telephone, just wandering around, getting up in the morning and following the sunlight through the leaves. About a year after that, I felt like I wanted to build something and started building roads. Met a guy with a bulldozer and a dump truck, and he taught me to drive this 10-tire dump truck, and we started building roads and bridges and ponds. I started building, and I had no idea why, not the slightest. But I was doing it just like I felt like I did when I was in the 5th grade in the sandbox, only with big toys. And that went on for a while, and the building got finished, and then I thought, well, what am I going to do with this building, and these roads, and this bridge? And I still didn't know. Time progressed, brought us up to 1985. Sitting there having a coffee on a Saturday morning, just about a little later than this. I don't usually have coffee because quite this early, but my mother called me from San Diego. And she said, your dad's going to the hospital, he's going to have his leg amputated. And I've told this story a lot, and every time I tell it, it just comes back. It's like a rocket. But I went to the coast to be with my folks. They saved his leg. He lost some toes, but it was clear that he was going to be disabled. He was going to have to use a chair, as a matter of fact. And on the way back on the plane, a question came into my mind, which was, what does a person who loves a wilderness environment but who is disabled do? Well, I couldn't stop that question. It just rolled on, and I found myself talking about it constantly. And I learned two things that were, to me, profound. At that point, I had never known anyone who was disabled. I didn't have any friends that were disabled. And I had no awareness of the situation that a disabled person might have or be in. But I learned that there were 40, at the time, the number was 30 million. People were telling me there were more than 30 million disabled people in this country, and I was astounded. I had no idea there were that many disabled people in this country. Now I hear the number is up to 43 million, but that's, the difference is not particularly important. The other thing I learned was that I couldn't find a way that for a person that was disabled to get into a wilderness environment. The Easter Seal Society in the region had built a camp for disabled children. And they were doing a good job with it. But it was a camp, and it was for children, and it was for disabled children. But the idea of a person who was disabled joining with able-bodied friends and family to go out and have a good time, be it a cookout or whatever, that wasn't possible that I could find. Well, several people that I had been talking to in the course of that period of time thought that that issue was worthy of special attention, and they volunteered to be a founding board of trustees for a new nonprofit corporation with a mission. And the mission was and continues to be to stimulate the development of access for disabled folks to natural wilderness environments. Very simple. So we thought, how are we going to do that? We thought what we'll do is build a model. We'll build a model, show how to do it, and to create excitement about it. And maybe somebody else will get enthused and call us up and say, we'd like to do one of those in our town or in our area. Can we get some information? So we set out with a goal to build that boardwalk, 8 feet wide, and 7 miles long to the top of a 12,300-foot mountain, the one I mentioned, North Cone of Twin Peaks. Well, we thought we could get it all done by, we set some goals. We said, well, phase 1 will take us this long. Phase 3, completion of the 7 miles of boardwalk, which is in the little yellow pamphlet I've laid on the table. There's a picture of that mountain. We thought we'd have it all done by 1989. Well, we found out why they call the Rockies the Rockies. It's taken as much as 30 hours to dig one hole for one bridge. And the boardwalk is built out of bridges 18 feet long, end to end to end to end. Each bridge has 2 holes. More than 50,000 volunteer hours, and 6 years later, we completed the first mile last fall. And we're very proud of that. Proud of it because it is stimulating projects. It is stimulating action. From the start, when we began, it was very slow going at first. For about the first 5-6 months, it was just myself and 2 other people digging these holes. First year we built only 400 feet of the boardwalk. But then finally, we had a breakthrough and got some publicity locally. And that stimulated some people to call and say they'd like to get involved. And that began our program called Give a Day, which has been very successful and continues to attract people. I'll leave tonight and I'll greet a group of probably 100 volunteers tomorrow morning to continue building that boardwalk. But the fact is that people read the story, and they do call us from other agencies and other places in this in the state and in the United States. We receive coverage nationally as well as locally, and that's resulted in inquiries from government agencies, private agencies, and individuals from around the country, and sometimes that results in other projects. So while we didn't make the goal of reaching the top of the mountain in 3 years, and people now say, well, when are you going to get there? And I love to tell them, I don't know. At the rate we're going, it might take 25 years. But fact is, it just doesn't make any difference. It's like the story about it isn't important where we're going, it's the fun of getting there. And those folks that come up there and put that time in, They just put in a lot of love. You can feel it. People come up because the court tells them to come up there. Community service, right? They come up and have a good time. They get through with their service, they come back. It's a success story that I like to tell. I'm going to pause this briefly from the remarks because I did bring along a tape with me which provides some graphics that are far better at expressing the kind of feeling that I'm trying to describe to you. And then I'll continue those remarks and talk about wildlife.
Halfway up Colorado's Kenosha Pass, an hour southwest of Denver, a dream is under construction. It's a specially designed boardwalk that gives the disabled and elderly access to the wilderness. The construction is wood and nails, but the real building blocks are compassion and determination.
The whole project started when one man turned his own personal grief into action.
What about there? In 1985, Roger West found out his father would be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life, unable to share in much of nature's beauty.
I was aware that he wouldn't be able to walk along the bank of the trout stream here with me, hike in the woods with me.
That marked the start of Wilderness on Wheels. It's a model facility, setting an example of how the disabled across the country can more easily enjoy nature. The Colorado project has attracted hundreds of volunteers, pitching in with supplies, know-how, or just plain hard work.
It's hard work, but it's you feel like you're doing something that's going to help somebody else. That's a good feeling.
Already disabled folks are using the trail, doing what most of us simply take for granted. We don't often think about the effort it takes to get off the beaten path and near a quiet stream. But for the disabled, without the Wilderness on Wheels boardwalk, this scene would be hopelessly out of reach. The Wilderness on Wheels goal is admittedly ambitious, to help those who otherwise couldn't even start climbing a mountain make it all the way to the top. With the courage, dedication, and passion that's already such a fundamental part of Wilderness on Wheels, reality will soon stand where once there was only a dream.
I can get out and do a lot more things on my own, not always having to have somebody here to help me get through the rough spots, and that with this boardwalk, it just makes it easier to go up the side of a mountain.
When they come here, and they can go out here and fish in the stream.
The look on their face, for me, is just all the payoff I need.
Thank you very much, sir.
It poured today at Kenosha Pass, southwest of Denver, but that didn't stop progress on Stage 2 of Wilderness on Wheels, a project that allows the handicapped to enjoy the wilderness firsthand. 45 volunteers at the Spalding Rehabilitation Hospital spent the day working to open up the wilderness to those in wheelchairs. And photographer Chris Wheeler went along and showed us their labor of love.
Of a lot of people who are in wheelchairs, that they will be able to come out and enjoy life with the rest of their families.
It makes it possible for people who wouldn't normally be able to enjoy the wilderness to come out and get in the mountains. People in wheelchairs don't. get to do this thing unless they have a special place to go.
We take for granted how easy things are. For us, we want to go to the mountains, we just get up and go, and yet our patients can't always do that.
That's what you call a hard rock climber.
There she is. And this is fun. It's a major engineering project.
Here comes the rain here. You can't have a little rain hunchback.
Nobody knows. We all may be in a wheelchair sometime, so if I can help out now, I certainly will. I had a feeling that I could do something for somebody else. They don't know me. They'll probably never know me. But I can drive along that highway, and I can look over here and know what I did on this day.
I'll be very proud to know that I've had a part in it.
It's beautiful, and I never dreamed of ever seeing anything like this. Listen, you tell Mama and Purple you caught a fish, and Goody had to take it and throw it back because it was too small. She's always been an outdoor person, but we could never get to where the other people were going because there just was not the means and for wheelchairs.
Aren't you doing wheelchairs? Are they overlooked?
Yeah.
Not as much as they used to be now.
Couldn't get much better. Given a choice between here and going to something ridiculous like Disney World, I don't have to think very long.
There we go. All right. And you'll hold that with your left hand. This is an opportunity for my friends to get out and do something that otherwise they wouldn't have an opportunity to do in the city.
You got the video.
Yeah, come on, play. That is a rainbow.
Oh, really?
Look at it, guys.
That's beautiful.
It is. It's truly wilderness on wheels.
I'm so thankful that there is more now to where so many more can get out and do this and enjoy the wonderful wildlife that there is.
I spoke earlier about not being able to find a way for a person who was disabled to get into a wilderness environment that is other than just disabled people, such as to a camp. And of course, the real issue here is that people not be left out, whoever they might be, if they have a disability, regardless of whether they use a wheelchair, whether they're elderly, whatever the reason is, that people not be left out, that they have the opportunity to join with able-bodied friends and family to do the same things that other people do, and in this case we're talking about experience a wilderness environment. We bend the rule, I suppose, in terms of wilderness with our model facility because indeed there's a highway beside it, and people say, well, you can hear the traffic. Well, you can look at the macrocosm if you like, but when somebody's sitting there by that trout stream, those trees are surrounding you and the little bugs are flying around, the fish gets on your line, that's wilderness. It feels like wilderness. So we do offer an opportunity for people to join in activities that are outdoors, be they a cookout, a hike in the woods, and by golly, you know what? I don't know if the word environment takes in, by definition, wildlife. If it doesn't, it should. I think it does. How do you spell potato? Told you I was working on it. Fact is that there's a lot of wildlife. There's everything to be seen at this model facility. Of course, Colorado is abundant with that, most anywhere in the state. But one frequently sees deer, their mother deer with their fawn running around all the time, and they're so really cute. They're not afraid. It seems that the boardwalk has created a permanent structure that everything seems to get used to. It's so clean. The environment isn't changed. We dig 2 holes, we put the footers in the holes, and we build on top of them. So it's like bridges over the terrain. The erosion, no erosion created from gouging the earth. And we put any debris that comes out of the hole, we use it somewhere else, on a road, a service road or something like that. So that when you walk the boardwalk, as you saw in the picture, especially that picture shows it in the rain, just so clean, just cruises right through there. And the deer can go under it. We make places where it's high off the ground, and wildlife can go right under there. So you see, gee, cougar, bear, deer, elk, bobcat, fox, coyote, whatever you can think of. We don't have any grizzly bear, we have black bear, but just all manner of wildlife in the area. And people will come down and say, "Oh, I saw one!" And they're just thrilled with that opportunity. And you know, another thing that has occurred that is just fantastic, it is and this goes back to that issue of being left out. Grandparents who say, "Gee, I raised my kids to love the outdoors, and we used to go out and do these things, and then we got older, and they, our kids and our grandkids, continued to go out and do things, and we were left out because we couldn't hike along that rugged terrain anymore. But now we can." And it's like something they never thought would happen. They were left out, a door was closed, and suddenly now it's open. And now, as things seem to be evolving, that door is opening very, very many places, and that's just fantastic progress in terms of a society, in my opinion. As I say, we've welcomed over 13,000 visitors to this facility so far. We've had various organizations, Forest Service has sent teams of engineers over there. Sometimes projects do follow as a result of inquiries by other agencies, and we try to provide whatever advice and counsel we have or can to these agencies and to anyone else that wants it. We have no staff. We've never had any staff. I've been a volunteer managing director for 6 years. We have no staff in the office, no secretary. We really struggle to do what we do. We could do more if we had the resources, but we don't. So we really have to say to an agency, "Gee, you come on over, bring your people over here and scope it out, bring your camera," and that happens. So we're able to address that issue in that manner. We also try to provide information as to what other areas are accessible, at least in the state of Colorado, so that people can indeed experience whatever they'd like to experience. One of the most profound things that I've been able to see in the state since we started in 1986 was the development of an organization and an energy, if you will, that'll be represented and spoke about by our next speaker, who is Carol Hunter, who in if I get my dates right, 88, started the Physically Challenged Access for the Disabled, and has just done a fantastic job of developing that into a very positive snowball that is carrying forth the energy of making accessible facilities in this country at a very progressive and actually astounding rate. So let me at this time welcome Carol Hunter.
Something else that Roger hasn't mentioned is that he's been amazing with the amount of excellent coverage he's been able to get for an accessible facility. He has also acted as a resource across the state for designs. The Forest Service has used Roger's design for a boardwalk in the Williams Fork. That is pretty amazing. Roger, yours is 8 feet wide? Okay. A lot of times I'm asked, what is a necessary width for a trail? I think it's extremely important that you first evaluate what you're trying to do with that facility. Are you trying to keep it very, very natural? Or is this something that is going to be a very urban setting or environment? The Americans with Disabilities Act is having a tremendous amount of impact on federal agencies. even though the law does not address federal agencies, it makes the general public well aware of what accessibility is, okay? And what I mean by that is the government, the federal agencies have been required for over 20 years to provide access. And I think in most cases they just didn't know how. The Americans with Disabilities Act is for public access, restaurants, hotels, any kind of public accommodations, but it is also for states and local government. Well, now the general public knows that if they go to a government facility, access is required. They don't honestly care if it's a state ranger or a Forest Service ranger. They don't care. All they know is that accessibility should be provided to them. A lot of people have become afraid of ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. It's really not a law that you need to be afraid of. The thing is, you have to understand what your programs are and what your facilities are. That's the first thing that you need to do. Once you understand that, then you can evaluate them and decide what part of it should be accessible. Roger's program pretty much addresses the mobility impaired. What I'd like to do in this session is to ask you to begin to think about the hearing, visual, and learning impaired. The key word for this part or this session is called mainstream. I want to give you some statistics. 37% of our population has some kind of disability that affects their quality of life. Quality of life means taking care of yourself, being able to work, to breathe, to see, to hear, to speak. These are all things that we often take for granted. That defines a disability, if you can't do these things, okay? Now, I'm here to help answer your questions, so feel free to stop me at any point, okay? There are some simple things out there that are being real helpful to all of us. This is an example of something being done by McDonald's. And you can find these at McDonald's all across the country, I suppose across the world. It was designed for the hearing impaired and persons with a learning disability. But what McDonald's has found out is the foreign visitor really enjoys this as well as the child. When we design facilities that incorporate persons with disabilities, we make a much better facility, a much better program that involves everybody. There are all kinds of things being developed for persons with disabilities that benefit us indirectly. This is a birdsong tutor for the visually, it has the word handicap in it, and I'll discuss that next, but for the visually impaired. But if you're a new bird learner, this is an excellent tool for anybody. So mainstreaming, although it was designed for persons with disabilities, it comes back and helps each one of us. I would like to show you an example of a video that was designed by the Audubon Society. It's this one here. And in the session that I had earlier, I asked them to think about this tape as if you were visually impaired first, and then switch roles and be hearing impaired. This tape was not designed for that purpose, but what I'm trying to get you to do is think of very simple things that you can do that meets this part of the population and also provide a better product. Okay?
Named for its mournful song, the mourning dove is among the most widespread and familiar of North American birds, living in open countryside and often in towns. It is pale buffy brown with a black spot on the face and others on the wings. There's a faint wash of pink on the underparts and gray on the back, but the best field mark is the long pointed tail. When it flies, the wings make a whistling sound, and white flashes in the sides of the tail. In winter, mourning doves may gather in large flocks to roost. Toward the northern edge of their wintering range, they tend to be uncommon and local. In summer, the canyons and riverside groves of the Southwest.
Okay, if you were visually impaired, what would you get from that tape?
Just
Sound, but was there not a description? A pretty thorough description? Okay. I have some friends that are blind, and they're the best bird watchers I know. They can pick up an amazing amount of sounds and the differences. Okay, now, if you were hearing impaired, what would you get out of that tape?
visual.
And did you notice that that the name of the bird was there, and then there was a picture of that bird on top of the name? So even if you couldn't hear the script or the sound or the description, you would have a very easy method of identifying that particular bird. Okay? The whole point of some of the things that I'm trying to show you is that there are simple things that we can do out there that we can adapt at very little cost. My favorite example of a mainstream design is the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty, the National Park Service, wanted to provide a facility that would meet the needs of the visually impaired when they remodeled the visitor center. So what they did was create several statues that are out of bronze that you can go over and touch. And then, at the very end of your visit, is an 8-foot in copper face of the statue that you are allowed to touch. It's very important that we put the sign, "Please touch," back into interpretation. There is nothing neater than going to an interpretive display and being able to touch. Children, adults, learning impaired, visually impaired, we learn through our fingers. So what they did was put this copper mask, exact replica, that you can touch. Well, it was designed for the visually impaired, but it is the favorite exhibit there. They also did a replica of the feet, and that's where all the families go to have their pictures taken. Again, an example of a mainstream design. Well, when I work with government agencies, I hear all the time, "We have no money." But it doesn't take a whole bunch of money to do some very simple examples or things that we can involve the public in. Have any of you been to the Rocky Mountain Arsenal eagle nesting area? Okay. They did something that I think is great, and I asked them about how much it cost, and they said about a couple of $100. What they have done is taken sheets of plywood, cut out outlines of birds from a very small one that you can touch and be this wide, to the eagle wingspan, which you can't reach. Again, it was designed in part for the visually impaired, but it doesn't matter if you can see or not. Everybody's up there checking it out and touching and seeing. It costs less than $200 to do a very simple interpretive display that kids like, adults like, and everybody can use. Also, they have designed that facility for wheelchair access as well. Well, as I said, most of you have to operate on very limited budgets. When Bob Kernbrough and I went to the Colorado School for the Deaf and Blind, I wanted to ask them if a blind child, older child, could understand this next concept. And what this is, I was at the Dinosaur Natural Museum, so this was easy to pick up, but it could be an elk or any other animal that you can find in the toy store. A child can feel this and get the basic outline of the animal. Then what I had done was a very simple but exact replica of the size of this pad on the dinosaur. It was to help the child begin to understand the size of a dinosaur. If this small thing is the same size in real life as this, they can understand that the dinosaur was a pretty big animal, okay? The same thing goes with an example of what we did. I was asked to interpret an arboretum in Idaho. What we did, they had the second largest cottonwood tree in Idaho. This thing doesn't like me. Well, if you stand underneath the tree, you have no idea how big that tree is. I mean, in relationship to anybody else. It's just, you look through the branches and you can't tell how high it is. So what we did was do something very similar to this, but in the shape of the cottonwood tree. And we did other models beside it, such as the state capitol. Where did the tree fit in relationship to the size of the state capitol? But we also did a one-story house so that they could understand how very, very big the cottonwood tree was. Another thing using the cottonwood was defining age historically for interpretation. Again, we did a form similar to this, and we did the tree as a seed, as a sapling, it's a couple of years old, and then the different stages of growth, and told what else was happening historically when the seed was planting, what else was happening, so that a child or an adult would understand how much time was invested in the growth of this tree, so that appreciation of the tree and the amount of time needed to make that tree what it is today was used. When we talk about interpretation, to me, it's one of the most important parts of your job if you want the public to understand and appreciate watchable wildlife. We take for granted that watchable wildlife is only a seeing experience. The exercise that we did in the last one of these, I blinded two of the participants and asked them to identify this skull. And it was amazing what they were able to do with their fingers. How much they were able to identify, and they guessed that this was a bear skull, and they were right. We think because a person cannot see or hear that they cannot enjoy the experience. As government agencies, we are required under the law to provide the most independent experience possible. People say, well, Carol, a blind person is not going to drive to our nature trail. Therefore, there will be somebody there to help them. No matter how much you love somebody that is blind, and you go to a nature trail and you try to tell a blind friend or a loved one what that trail is about, it is still your experience and not theirs. So providing an experience that is independent, that person can pick up what he loves and hears himself and make it his experience. True. The blind person is not going to drive to the site. But we do not want to take his freedom away. He has a right, or she has a right, to enjoy that trail as much as you and I do. ADA Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act does not require that everything that you make or provide be accessible. But it does require that you evaluate all of your facilities and programs and understand what you are offering the general public. When you understand what the program is, then you are required to provide a program that provides that same thing for the persons with disabilities. For example, if you have several nature trails, they do not all have to be accessible. But in evaluating the nature trail, you can look at the ones that takes into account the topography, which one is the easiest to make wheelchair accessible. Which nature trail provides the most in the way of experiences in a very short area? Take that into account. Okay? When you evaluate the nature trail, and there is a restroom at the beginning of that nature trail, that restroom is part of that program. That's very important. So you have to look at the facilities that are there. And if you replace that restroom with new construction, then it needs to be accessible. There is no way of getting around new construction. New construction must be accessible. We are in a process of transition. That's why these evaluations are so important. You don't have to go out tomorrow, raise $10, $15, $25 million to make everything on your district or area accessible. But the transition plan allows you time to incorporate accessibility. If there is a court case brought against you for something not being accessible, and you have not identified that problem in a transition plan, then you really don't stand much of a chance in court. But if you have gone ahead and evaluated all your facilities and programs and that you have identified these problems, it is extremely important that you involve persons with disabilities or people that can represent the disabled in your evaluations. Then, if you can show that you are aware of the problem, you have identified it, and you have a plan for fixing that problem, then you will most likely be okay. It's extremely important also that the person that greets your public is aware of the transition plan and can discuss it with your visitors. So often a complaint can be stopped right then. If a person that, let's say a person in a wheelchair is very, very angry because they can't get into your office. If the person involved with the public can say, yes, we're very sorry, we have looked at these problems, this is our transition plan, this is our time frame, how do you feel about this? Have you got any other suggestions? Will this meet your needs? What do you think we should be doing in the meantime? Involve that person in the problem solving. I cannot stress the seriousness of the transition plan. These have to be done. And it doesn't matter if you're the local office or the state. Okay? Roger, you want to come on up and do questions with me? Any questions for Roger or myself?
I have a question.